This is Mac OS Ken.
A rough day for Apple shares. The rest of the .3 developer betas arrive, and an Apple financial analyst rides into the sunset. It is Friday, the 17th of January, 2025. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken. Brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSCan. Remember all that talk earlier this week about iPhone's shrinking market share and Samsung being number one in the world? Then Canalys issued a report saying iPhone was number one for the planet in 2024, so no worries, I guess. Yeah, never mind my never mind part from earlier this week. Apple shares fell about 4% on Thursday, down $9.61. It was the worst day for the share since August of last year, and it happened for reasons. A piece from CNBC lists a few possible contributing factors. Those included a bummer forecast for the current quarter from Apple's chip-making partner TSMC. Numbers thrown out by the Taiwanese company suggested a nearly 6% sequential drop in smartphone sales, according to the report. There was the note of skepticism earlier in the week from TF International analyst Ming-Chi Kuo. That was the post that said Apple was speaking cautiously to suppliers about iPhone production in 2025, that said Apple Intelligence showed little sign of driving an upgrade cycle, and that had iPhone shipments dropping by about 10% to 12% year-on-year, reflecting a continued slide in Apple's Chinese market share. Then CNBC mentioned the note from Canalys. Oh, not the one from earlier this week, the one that hit in the middle of the night Wednesday night, Thursday morning. According to the news site, Apple's slide came after a report Thursday from Canalys, a market research firm, which suggested that Apple had fallen to third place in terms of smartphones sold in China in 2024, behind homegrown manufacturers Vivo and Huawei. Apple shipped 15% of the 284 million phones sold in China last year, according to the report, but that was down 17% on an annual basis. Vivo and Huawei, meanwhile, saw strong growth. Wait, was that the same Canalys that said earlier this week that Apple is expected to achieve growth in 2025, driven by a refreshed portfolio, hardware upgrades, and broader adoption of Apple Intelligence? Well, yes, but we're not talking about that right now. While Canalys says iPhone won the year in terms of global units shipped, it did not win China. For the year, Vivo was first in China with a market share of 17%. Huawei was second with a market share of 16%. Apple was third with a market share of 15%, though one kind of wants to put an asterisk by that. Fourth place Oppo and fifth place Honor also had shares of 15%, with just a few 100,000 units separating the three phone makers. Interestingly, iPhone did win the Chinese market for the fourth quarter. Again, kind of. For the December quarter, Apple was first in China with a 17% market share, followed by second place Vivo with a 17% market share, and third place Huawei with a 17% market share. There are a couple of numbers to note. First, only 200,000 units separate first and third by the firm's reckoning. Additionally, Apple shipments for Q4 24 were down 25% versus the same quarter a year earlier, according to Canalys. Surprising to hear that this had not happened before, but a piece from TechCrunch says Apple has launched its dedicated Apple Store app in India. Must have happened over the last few hours, since I was reading a story Thursday that said it happened on Friday. Time zones are funny. The article goes deep on what people can do with the Apple Store app. Sorry, it sounds rude when I say it that way, but it could have been worse. They could have told people where they could stick it. Anyway, you probably know what the Apple Store app is for. Letting people buy stuff and get support. Apple's Apple Store app is available in Apple's App Store. India now included. The rest of Apple's blank.3 developer betas have finally turned up. Tuesday saw Apple see the third betas of tvOS 18.3 and watchOS 11.3 to its developer program. 48 hours later, somebody woke up and hit the rest of the buttons. A piece from Mac Rumors on Thursday had Apple making the third developer betas of iOS and iPadOS 18.3 available, while a piece from 9 to 5 Mac had Apple doing the same for macOS Sequoia 15.3 and visionOS 2.3. On the phone and tablet side, Mac Rumor says the updates are mostly focused on bug fixes, but they will likely bring support for robot vacuums to HomeKit. They may also stop lying to you about the news. Remember the problem toward the end of 2024? The one that had Apple Intelligence summarizing news headlines into whole new news stories that never actually happened? Like the time it told people that the Israeli Prime Minister had been arrested, or the time it said the guy who shot the CEO of United Healthcare had shot himself. These were not things that actually happened, and it kind of made the news organizations whose stories had been so incorrectly summarized a bit cross. Apple said it would address the issue, not by making sure Apple Intelligence got the stories right, but instead by making sure that people knew that the summaries were AI generated, so don't take their word for it. Sort of seems like Apple may be rethinking that. A piece from TechCrunch says with the latest round of developer previews for iOS 18.3, iPadOS 18.3, and macOS Sequoia 15.3, Apple is disabling notification summaries entirely for all news and entertainment apps, and will re-enable them in a future update after refining them. As for the summaries Apple Intelligence will still handle, the piece says Apple will remind users in settings that the notification summaries feature is a beta feature. They'll put the summaries in italics to make them easier for people to ID as AI, and they'll make it possible for users to disable notification summaries for a specific app directly from the lock screen. Developer betas weren't the only software released by Apple on Thursday. Back to Mac Rumors we go, where we find the Cupertino company releasing tvOS 18.2.1. According to Apple's release notes, according to Mac Rumors, the update addresses an issue where data may not sync correctly across devices. The value of your older Apple gear is once again in flux. A piece from iDownload blog says Apple has adjusted estimated trade-in values for specific iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple Watch models, with some going up, but most going down. Mac's trade-in values for iPhones and iPads have gone down according to the piece. Models of iPhone 14 and 15 have seen their maxes sliced by between $10 and $50 depending on the model. Maxes for iPads have also dropped between $5 and $35. A couple of Macs also lost trade-in value, as did Apple Watch Series 7. As far as values on the rise, those belong to Apple Watch Series 8, Apple Watch Ultra 2, and the MacBook Pro. And finally today, news that leaves me stymied, agog, fashmulyad maybe. Apple 3.0 ran a note from Bernstein analyst Toni Sacconaghi on Thursday, saying Bernstein analyst Toni Sacconaghi is retiring from Bernstein. According to the goodbye note he wrote, "For the last 26 years, I have been privileged to have a front row seat observing and following some of the most important companies and iconic leaders in global business. It has been a blast, but I am ready for my next chapter. Going forward, I hope to be able to spend more time with my family and travel, as well as serve on a small number of nonprofit and/or for-profit boards, invest, and potentially teach." But, okay. Hey, is there anything good to watch on Apple TV Plus this weekend? Anybody know? Some sort of dystopian workplace, something maybe? Jiminy Christmas, the build-up for Severance has been so big, you would think people actually had Apple TV Plus. Season 2, Episode 1 of Severance went live last night. Get ready to be confused. First though, this week on the checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac, bad guys are scamming in the wake of the LA fires, targeting both fire victims and people who want to help them. We'll look at how and how to avoid falling prey. Also, SMS phishing attempts are on the rise. We'll take a look at a new twist and why we should ignore those messages. That is all this week on Checklist 407, Scams Sparked by SoCal Fires. Find it today at securemac.com/checklist or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSken. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Everyone's a robot.